So we got the return of Danny Swift Garcia. He's going to be fighting Jose Benavidez Jr. Plus, we got Gary Antoine Russell fighting Francis Bartolome. Let's talk about it.
They hear him. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier.
Hey, what's up with it, fam? It's Hot Boxing Minute, your favorite pharmaceutical engineer turned boxing analyst. Let's talk about the fight card this weekend. Boxing has been in a bit of a lull. It's kind of in a low period. Go figure, folks. We were getting blessed with back-to-back undisputed title fights, packed arenas, packed stadiums. It was bound to slow down. So we're going through a little bit of a slow period. So I went through all the gossip stuff already in the last video. Let's talk about the fight we got coming up this weekend. Not the biggest fight, but I do believe it's got some intriguing names. The headline on the fight card, it's a Showtime card a la PBC. We got Danny Swift Garcia, Philadelphia's finest, going up against the bad boy from Phoenix, Jose Benavidez Jr. Now, this is going to be Danny Swift Garcia's first foray into the junior middleweight division, 154-pound limit. Jose Benavidez Jr. on his last fight at 154 was against Francisco Emmanuel Torres in a very mid, I guess we're going to call it mid, in a very mid fight. The hometown crowd was booing their hometown boy. That's kind of how bad the performance was. Jose Benavidez was applying the pressure. But yeah, so Jose Benavidez Jr. in that last fight against Francisco Emmanuel Torres, I had to write it down because I don't even remember the dude's name. I do remember watching the fight, and I remember thinking at the very least it should have been a draw, if not in favor of Torres. And it really was kind of telling that the hometown crowd was booing their boy Jose Benavidez Jr. I'm just saying that's kind of how I read that last fight. And we got Danny Swift Garcia. Just to read their records off real quick, Danny is currently 36-3 with 21 KOs. We've got Jose Benavidez 27-1 with 18 KOs. Danny Swift Garcia, he's been around for a while. He's kind of been a PBC staple as of the last 5 to 10 years, roughly. He was a champion in the junior welterweight division at 140, got a belt at 147. He's looking to become a 3-division champion in his first step in the junior middleweight division. I like Danny Swift Garcia, and I've always liked him. He had the close fights, those losses against Errol Spence, and if I'm not mistaken, he lost to Keith Thurman. Yeah, Keith Thurman, but you know, he did knock out Adrian Granados. He did knock out Amir Khan. He did beat a faded Eric Morales. So he's given us some classics. There was that Mauricio Herrera fight. Man, he could have said he got a gift decision on that one. It happens in close fights at times. And then we've got Jose Benavidez Jr., who was a stud before he got shot in the leg. And those kind of tragic incidences do happen. But he hasn't quite been the same. He ended up getting knocked out in 12th round by Terrence Crawford when he fought for the title at welterweight in an unsuccessful attempt, although he was the first guy to take Terrence Bud Crawford all the way out 12 rounds. It's an interesting fight because both of these guys got a lot to prove. Danny Swift Garcia, Jose Benavidez Jr., this fight between them, although it is kind of below the radar, it is an entertaining fight for hardcore fight fans because both of these fighters are very compelled to win, and both of them have a lot to lose as far as where they want to go with their careers should they not win in this fight. You got Danny Swift Garcia, of course. He wants to become a champion in the third weight division. Jose Benavidez Jr. wants to become a champion in the junior middleweight division. He wants to prove that even after the gunshot wound to his leg, he is still a viable stud in his boxing game. Danny Swift Garcia would like to make history. So both of these guys have a lot of reasons to want to win in this upcoming fight. And you got Danny Swift Garcia. What can you say about Danny Garcia? I really like his style. He's got a very clean, very clinical, orthodox style. Some would say he's a bit conservative with his punch output. When Danny Swift Garcia fought Errol Spence Jr., when Errol Spence Jr. was just coming off of that car crash where he wrecked the Ferrari, you know, Danny Swift Garcia, I think the biggest criticism was that he wasn't letting his hands go. And that is kind of his style. He's a counterpuncher. So he kind of waits for the openings, and, you know, he's got that knockout blind left hook that he throws without looking that can put people down wasn't very effective against Errol Spence Jr., but I thought it was a good fight. But Errol Spence Jr. clearly won that by decision. And I think in this fight, it's going to be one fans are going to want to watch. I think, this weekend, Showtime card, PBC, Danny Swift Garcia versus Jose Benavidez Jr. Both of these guys are tough. Both of these guys come to play, and they come to play hard. And I think it's something that fans are going to want to watch. So I want to ask the boxing community as far as Danny Swift Garcia versus Jose Benavidez Jr., who wins? Is it going to be Danny Swift Garcia, the counterpuncher from Philly with the knockout check hook? Or is it going to be the pressure fighter from Phoenix, Jose Benavidez Jr.? Let me know in the comments section, y'all. Let's chop this one up. It's going to be a good fight. On the undercard to that, they've got Julian J. Rock Williams, who, as far as I can tell, his opponent hasn't been announced yet. So I'm not even sure if he's going to fight because it's a little bit late in the game and I couldn't find any information. I just saw that he was on the undercard. And then we've got Adam Konoski, who's coming off that recent knockout loss to that big Viking guy whose name I forgot, the other heavyweight dude that was in Deontay Wilder's camp, but Robert Helenius. So that might be one you want to watch. But the other fight I'm really intrigued by on this Showtime card coming to PBC, Gary Antoine Russell versus Francis Bartholomew. I like the Gary Antoine Russell family lineage. You rest in peace to Gary Russell Sr., but that Gary Russell Sr. School of Hard Knocks, obviously you got Gary Russell Jr., you got Gary Antoine Russell, and I don't know the other variations of the Russells, to be honest, off the top of my head, but that little family out there representing the DMV from out of that part of the country definitely has some talented boxing lineage, and Gary Antoine Russell is no exception to that. Gary Antoine Russell is undefeated. He's 15-0. All 15 of those are knockouts. He was an amateur standout. And one of the things I like to bring up is that he beat Jerron Boots Ennis for the national title a few years back. That's Gary Antoine Russell, folks. And he just so happens to be in the 140-pound division. He's been making a lot of noise. In his last fight, it was actually, is he in the 140-pound? Is it 147 or let me check this out real quick. Did he move up in weight? Let's see. Gary Antoine Russell. Because I know he fought Victor Postal in his last fight, and I don't really quite remember off the top of my head, was that, does it give us the weight? Oh, super lightweight. Okay, so it's at 140 pounds. Okay, so I wasn't mistaken in that. Okay, so you got Gary Antoine Russell, who was part of, okay, I think he was, yes. So we got Gary Antoine Russell, who has the deep amateur pedigree. He was part of the U.S. Olympic team. He did beat Jerron Boots Ennis in the amateurs, currently sits at 15-0 with 15 knockouts. He's going to be fighting a former two-division champion, Francis Bartholomew, this weekend as the undercard to the Jose Benavidez Jr., Danny Swift Garcia fight. And I really like this matchup. I do. Now, Gary Russell Jr., he is a southpaw with a wicked high ring IQ. Francis Bartholomew is a former two-division champion himself. Francis Bartholomew's record is 29-1-1. He's only lost one fight. That was against Kirill Relik, a Belarusian. And he lost that one. He got one draw on his record. That was against Robert Easter Jr. And, you don't want to sleep on Francis Bartholomew in this fight against Gary Antoine Russell Jr. Francis Bartholomew has a very high ring IQ. He's a competent switch hitter, meaning he can trade off from orthodox to southpaw, and he comes from that well-educated Cuban school of boxing. So his defense is pretty airtight. So it's going to be a good skill matchup between him and Gary Antoine Russell in this fight. And they've both got a lot to prove. Obviously, you got a former two-division champion, Francis Bartholomew, who wants to be a champion in yet another, wants to get a championship belt again in the super lightweight division. You got Gary Antoine Russell, who's been facing some of the best competition for a guy who's only got 15 fights so far as a pro. Gary Antoine Russell really strikes me as the type that's down to fight anybody in the 140-pound division. And he's got a good foe ahead of him in the form of Francis Bartholomew. If anything, I would lean towards Gary Antoine Russell because he has the power and he's a proven dog. Gary Antoine Russell, you fight him, you hit him hard, he's going to hit you back. He might be able to take advantage of Francis Bartholomew's cautiousness because Francis Bartholomew does not like to exchange heavy. He's from that Cuban school, so he stays very disciplined behind that jab. He does have very, very good offensive tools himself, but it should be a good matchup. But I'm leaning towards Gary Antoine Russell. I think this might be the first fight where Gary Antoine Russell doesn't win by stoppage. Boxing community, as far as this matchup between Gary Antoine Russell and Francis Bartholomew, how do you think it plays out? Let me know in the comments section, folks. Hit like if you haven't already done so. I hope you're already pressing follow. This is going to be where I end this video, folks. I'll catch you on the next one. This is Hot Boxing Minute, the future of YouTube boxing analysis. Peace.